There is a kind of heartbreak that could have been avoided. Not the heartbreak that comes from two genuinely good people who loved honestly and grew in different directions. Not the heartbreak that is simply the cost of being human and vulnerable and willing to try. I am talking about a different kind entirely. The kind that arrives after you have given 2, 3, 5, 7 years of your one and only life to someone. And you sit one day in the wreckage of what that relationship has become, and you realize with a clarity that is devastating in its precision that the signs were there from the beginning. You just did not know what to look for. That particular kind of heartbreak is what this conversation is designed to prevent. Not by making you cynical, not by turning the early season of any relationship into an interrogation, not by arming you with a checklist that reduces the sacred, complex, beautifully unpredictable experience of getting to know another human being into a screening process that leaves no room for grace or growth, but by giving you the wisdom to see clearly before emotional investment has made seeing clearly difficult. Because there is a window early in any relationship when the information needed to make a wise decision is most readily available and most easily interpreted. And most women miss that window, not because the information was not there, but because nobody taught them what to look for or why it mattered. So let me teach you. With the love of someone who has watched too many gifted, extraordinary, God-fearing women pour their best years into situations that reveal their true nature too late, because the early questions were never asked. The first thing you must know before you date a man is the quality and consistency of his character when he is under pressure. Easy seasons reveal very little about a person. When everything is going well, when money is adequate, when relationships are uncomplicated, when professional life is running smoothly, almost anyone can appear patient, generous, kind, and emotionally stable. Character is not tested in those seasons. It is displayed in them, and display is not the same as depth. What you need to know before you commit your heart to someone is who he is when things go wrong. How does he handle disappointment? What does he do with failure? How does he treat people around him when he's under financial strain? What happens to his demeanor, his language, his behavior toward you specifically when the pressure of life increases? Proverbs 17:3 says, the fining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord trieth the hearts. The heart is tried in the furnace, not in comfort. You cannot know the character of a man's heart by observing him only in comfortable circumstances. You must observe him over time in the furnace. In the moments that reveal what he's actually made of beneath the presentation he makes when he's deliberately trying to impress you. And the early season of a relationship before comfort has settled in is precisely when you have the best opportunity to observe those moments. If you are watching carefully enough to see them, rather than simply experiencing the parts of him that feel good, watch how he handles being corrected. Does he receive honest feedback with maturity, or does he immediately become defensive, dismissive, or punishing toward the person who offered it? Watch how he handles waiting. Is he patient in inconvenience, or does he become irritable, impatient, and demanding when things do not move at his preferred speed? Watch how he handles disappointment that he did not cause. A flight cancelled, a restaurant that is fully booked, a plan that falls through because of circumstances entirely outside anyone's control. How a person handles disappointment they cannot direct toward anyone specific is enormously revealing, because it shows you how they relate to the basic, unavoidable frustrations of a human life when there is no one available to absorb the cost of their irritation. The second thing you must know is how he talks about the women from his past. This is not gossip. It is not an invitation to spend your early relationship relitigating his history. It is one of the most reliable available insights into how he understands relationships, how he assigns responsibility, and whether he's capable of the kind of honest self-examination that genuine growth requires. A man who speaks about every former partner with contempt, who has a ready and fluent narrative in which every previous relationship failed entirely because of what the other person did, who has never in any relationship taken meaningful personal responsibility for his contribution to its difficulties is a man who has not yet developed the self-awareness necessary for genuine partnership. Because here is the reality that nobody states plainly enough. If every woman he has ever been with was unreasonable, you are not the exception. You are the next person in the pattern. The pattern does not change because you are different. The pattern changes when he is different, and he does not become different simply by being in proximity to a better person. He becomes different through the intentional, often painful, spirit-guided work of genuine self-examination and character growth. Without that work, the most exceptional woman in the world will eventually be added to the list of unreasonable women he has known, and her name will be spoken with the same fluent contempt he uses for all the others. By contrast, a man who can speak about past relationships with a level of honest reflection, who can acknowledge his own failures without excessive self-flagellation, who can describe what he learned rather than only what he lost or what was done to him, who can extend genuine charity toward people who genuinely hurt him without entirely erasing the reality of what happened, that man is demonstrating an emotional and relational maturity that is extraordinarily valuable, not because he's perfect, but because he's honest. And honesty about the past is one of the most reliable predictors of the honesty that will be available to navigate the future. The third thing you must know is whether he has a living, personal, independent relationship with God. And I want to emphasize every one of those words. Living, meaning active, growing, genuinely sustained, not a historical faith that was real in a previous season and is now being traded on as social currency. Personal, meaning his own, developed through his own prayer, his own encounter, his own wrestling with God in the private dimensions of his life, not merely the reflected faith of his parents, his church culture, or the woman he is currently pursuing. Independent, meaning it exists and functions when you are not in the picture, when the motivation of impressing a spiritually serious woman has been removed, when the only audience for his spiritual life is God himself. 1 Corinthians 2:14 says, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. A man who does not have a genuine living relationship with God cannot receive or discern the things of the Spirit of God. Which means that in the most critical moments of your shared life, in the moments that require spiritual discernment, genuine faith, and the kind of leadership that can only come from a man who knows how to hear from God, he will be operating from a different framework than you are. And that difference, charming and manageable in the romance of early relationship, becomes profoundly consequential when you are trying to raise children, navigate crises, make decisions about your future, and build a home that carries the manifest presence of God. The evidence of a living relationship with God is not church attendance alone. It is not the correct theological vocabulary. It is not the ability to pray impressively in your presence. It is the fruit. Galatians 5:22 and 23 describe that fruit specifically. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Is that fruit genuinely present in his daily, ordinary life? Not performed in your presence, but consistently visible in the texture of how he lives, how he treats people, how he makes decisions, how he responds to difficulty and blessing alike. Because fruit does not lie. Charisma can lie. Words can lie. Spiritual performance can lie. But fruit, observed consistently over time across different contexts, is one of the most reliable revelations of what is actually growing inside a person. The fourth thing you must know before you date a man is his relationship with money, his own financial integrity, and his capacity for genuine financial responsibility. This is a subject many women avoid because money feels unromantic, or because they fear that asking questions about it will make them seem materialistic, or because they have been taught that a spiritually minded woman should trust God rather than scrutinizing financial details. But the avoidance of this conversation does not produce better outcomes. It produces avoidable surprises that arrive later when the financial reality of someone's life has already become entangled with yours. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. A man who is chronically in debt, not from a single difficult season, but from patterns of financial behavior that have produced consistent debt, is a man whose options are constrained by obligations he made before you arrived. Those obligations do not disappear when he enters a relationship with you. They follow him, and eventually they follow both of you. A man who is dishonest about his financial situation, who minimizes debt, conceals obligations, or presents a picture of financial health that does not reflect reality, is a man who is practicing deception in an area of life that will directly affect your shared future. You are not looking for wealth. You are looking for integrity, wisdom, and responsibility in how he manages what he has, whether that is much or little. A man who manages little with honesty and wisdom and a genuine plan for growth is a far better financial partner than a man who has the appearance of much but manages it with dishonesty and indiscipline. Luke 16:10 says, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. How he handles money when no one is checking is a direct window into how he will handle the shared financial stewardship of a household, of children, of a future built together. The fifth thing you must know is how he treats the people who can do nothing for him. This is the single most reliable character assessment available in any relationship, because how a person treats people they have no reason to impress is the fullest available expression of who they actually are. How does he treat waitstaff? How does he speak to people in service roles? How does he relate to the person who is less educated, less successful, less socially prominent, less able to advance his interests or increase his standing? How does he treat his own family members when the facade of public behavior is no longer required? Jesus identified this principle clearly when he described the nature of genuine greatness in Mark 10:43 and 44. Whosoever will be great among you shall be your minister, and whosoever of you will be the chiefest shall be servant of all. Servanthood toward the powerless is not weakness in the kingdom. It is the measurement of genuine greatness. A man who treats the powerful with deference while treating the powerless with contempt is a man whose generosity and warmth are not genuinely his. They are strategic. They are deployed where they produce benefit. And what that tells you is that the warmth he extends toward you in the early season of relationship, when you are the person he most wants to impress, is not necessarily the warmth you will receive when the strategic motivation of impression has been replaced by the comfort of assumption. But a man who is consistently kind, genuinely considerate, and authentically respectful toward people who can do nothing for him is demonstrating a character that is not contingent on audience. And a character not contingent on audience is a character you can trust to treat you with that same consistency when the relationship has matured beyond the season of impression into the daily ordinary fabric of shared life. The sixth thing you must know is how he handles conflict. Not whether he conflicts, because every healthy relationship involves conflict. And a man who has never experienced or created interpersonal conflict has simply not been in relationships intimate enough or long enough to produce it. The question is not whether he conflicts, but how. Does he fight fairly, staying on the specific issue at hand rather than escalating to global character attacks? Does he allow space for your perspective even when it challenges his? Does he take responsibility clearly and specifically when he is wrong, without immediately redirecting to something you also did as a way of distributing the accountability until it no longer belongs primarily to him? Does he know how to apologize without qualification, without the but that restores his position as soon as it appears to have been surrendered? Matthew 5:23 and 24 describe the spiritual priority of reconciliation. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. The willingness to initiate reconciliation To go first in taking responsibility, even at personal cost, is a spiritual quality that has enormous practical implications in the daily reality of shared life. A man who knows how to go first in reconciliation, who values the relationship above his need to be right, who can sit in the discomfort of having been wrong without immediately needing to be comfortable again, is a man who will make conflict productive rather than destructive across the full duration of a relationship. The seventh thing you must know is what he is building and whether it has direction. A man who has no vision for his life, no sense of what he is working toward, no genuine forward momentum in any dimension of purpose, is a man who cannot lead because there is nowhere he is going. Not every man will have a fully articulated 5-year plan. Life is rarely that neat. But every man who is genuinely prepared for covenant partnership will have something he is working toward with consistency and faith. Something larger than his own comfort and entertainment. Something that demonstrates he understands he was placed on the earth for a purpose that extends beyond his own satisfaction. Proverbs 29:18 says, where there is no vision, the people perish. The principle applies at the scale of the individual life as much as at the scale of a nation. A man without vision perishes in the specific sense of drifting through his days without the kind of intentional direction that makes genuine partnership possible. Because partnership requires two people who are going somewhere together, and you cannot go somewhere together with someone who is not going anywhere at all. You are also looking within this question of vision for whether the vision he carries has room for yours. A man who has enormous clarity about his own direction but has never considered whether the woman beside him has her own God-given assignment is a man who is looking for a supporting character in his own story rather than a genuine covenant partner in a shared one. Genesis 1:28 gave the dominion mandate to them, to both, to the man and the woman together. Your calling is not subordinate to his. It is alongside his. And a man who cannot see or celebrate the specific assignment God has placed on your life is not prepared to build with you the way that mandate requires. The eighth thing you must know is whether he is honest when honesty costs him something. Anyone can be honest about things that do not disadvantage them. The test of genuine honesty is what a person does when the truth makes them look bad. When telling the truth means losing something they value. When the easier and more comfortable path is a small omission or a strategic half-truth that achieves the desired outcome without the cost of complete transparency. Proverbs 12:17 says, an honest witness delivers truthful testimony, but a false witness tells lies. The quality of the witness a man gives about himself, about his history, about his present reality, about his intentions is one of the most important things you can observe in the early season of any relationship. Not because you are looking to catch him in something, but because honesty in the small, low-stakes moments of early relationship is the foundation of the honesty that will be needed in the high-stakes moments of sustained partnership. A man who will bend the truth to manage your impression of him in the comfortable early season of relationship will bend it again in the difficult moments of your shared future when the pressure to manage your perception is even higher. You are specifically looking for honesty about his past, which we addressed earlier. You are looking for honesty about his present, what his life actually looks like, what his finances actually are, what his relationships actually consist of, what his struggles actually include. And you are looking for honesty about his intentions. Because one of the most fundamental ways disrespect enters a relationship early is through a man who is unclear, evasive, or dishonest about what he wants from the connection you are building. The ninth thing you must know is the quality of his inner circle. Who he spends his most consistent time with, who he turns to in difficulty, who has genuine influence in his life, is one of the clearest windows available into who he actually is beneath the presentation he makes in your presence. Because the people who know a person most intimately, who have experienced them across seasons and circumstances, who have witnessed the private dimensions of a person's character that are carefully managed in public, Those people carry information about who he is that you, in the early days of a relationship, do not yet have access to through your own experience. 1 Corinthians 15:33, which says, be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners, is a warning about the profound influence that consistent close relationships have on the formation and maintenance of character. The man whose closest friends are men of genuine integrity, genuine faith, genuine emotional maturity, and genuine honesty is a man who is being consistently encouraged toward those same qualities by the company he keeps. The man whose closest friends model dishonesty, manipulation, immaturity, or contempt toward women is a man who is being consistently reinforced in those same qualities, regardless of what he presents to you directly. Observe his friendships, not to interrogate or audit, but to understand who does he speak of with genuine respect, who speaks with genuine respect of him, who does he call when he is struggling. What do his closest relationships reveal about what he values, what he tolerates, and what kind of person he is when you are not the audience? The 10th and most important thing you must know before you date a man is who you are, what you carry, and what you are worth. This is not the 10th point because it is the least important. It is the 10th because it is the one everything else depends on. And I want it to be the last thing you read so that it is the thing you carry forward most clearly. Because here is what I've observed consistently. The woman who knows who she is, who has spent enough time in the presence of God to have a deeply settled, internally rooted, not performative, but genuine understanding of her own worth and her own calling, is the woman who is least susceptible to the manipulations and misrepresentations that cause other women to stay too long in the wrong situations. She is least susceptible, not because she is arrogant or suspicious, but because she has a clear standard established not by her own pride, but by what God has already declared. And that standard is not negotiable downward for the sake of avoiding the discomfort of an empty season. Isaiah 43:4 says, since thou was precious in my sight, thou hast been honorable, and I have loved thee. Precious, honorable, loved. Not potentially, not contingently, not depending on whether the man you are interested in agrees already, permanently, by the unchanging assessment of the one who made you. A woman who inhabits that truth fully does not need a man to tell her what she is worth. She does not need his attention to confirm her value or his pursuit to establish her sense of self. She comes to any relationship complete, which is the only condition from which genuine partnership can be built. Because partnership is built by two whole people choosing to build something together, not by two incomplete people attempting to find completion in each other. Know what you are worth before you sit across from anyone else. Know your calling, know your standards, know what you will accept and what you will not. Know what a relationship must produce to be consistent with the purposes God has for your life. And let that knowing be so deeply established, so genuinely yours, so clearly rooted in what God has spoken rather than what culture has pressured, that no amount of attention, attraction, charm, or chemistry can override it when the evidence of who someone actually is begins to surface. That knowing is the most protective thing you can carry into the conversation about who deserves to be in your life. More protective than any list of questions, more protective than any screening process, more protective than any external wisdom, including this conversation. Because when you know who you are, you will recognize the man who knows how to honor it, and you will equally recognize the one who does not. And the difference between those two recognitions, acted on wisely and in time, is the difference between the kind of heartbreak that could have been avoided and the kind of love that was worth every moment of waiting for. Let me go deeper into the third point. Because the question of a man's relationship with God is the one that women in church context are most frequently confused about. And the confusion has costs that are too significant to leave unaddressed. The confusion exists because the environment of church, which is where many spiritually serious women meet men, creates a social context in which certain spiritual performances are expected and produce social benefit. Attending service, knowing the right language, being visibly involved in ministry, responding correctly in prayer meetings, these behaviors are rewarded with social standing in church environments. And a man who is motivated by social standing rather than genuine devotion will produce all of them without the underlying substance that makes them meaningful. The term for this is religious performance, and it is entirely distinct from genuine faith. Religious performance is consistent in public context where it is observed and rewarded. Genuine faith is consistent in private context where no audience exists. Religious performance knows how to pray impressively when praying in front of you. Genuine faith has a prayer life that exists when you are not there. Religious performance attends Sunday service and speaks correctly about spiritual things in conversation. Genuine faith has a relationship with God that shapes decisions, changes behavior, produces genuine repentance, and grows visibly over time. Matthew 7:22 and 23 record some of the most sobering words in scripture on this subject. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works. And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that walk iniquity. Men who prophesied, men who cast out devils, men who did wonderful works in the name of the Lord. And yet, at the final accounting, the relationship was found to be one directional. They knew his name. He did not know them. The works were real. The relationship was not. I am not suggesting you apply that verse to every man in church as a sweeping condemnation. I am suggesting you use it as a reminder that external spiritual activity, even impressive external spiritual activity, is not the same thing as an interior life genuinely submitted to God. And the difference between the two is revealed not in a single impressive moment, but in the pattern of a life observed over time, in private as much as in public, in difficult moments as much as in celebratory ones, in how he treats you when nothing spiritual is at stake, as much as in how he treats you when the audience of other believers is watching. Ask him about his prayer life specifically. Not to audit him, but to genuinely understand, when did he last spend sustained time alone with God? What does he bring to God in prayer? What has God been saying to him recently? How does he navigate the seasons when God feels distant? These are not gotcha questions. They are the kind of questions that, answered honestly, reveal the texture of a genuine interior life with God. And they are questions that a man with that interior life will answer with the kind of natural, unguarded specificity that cannot be easily manufactured. There is a dimension of the fifth point, how he treats people who can do nothing for him, that I want to extend into the specific area of how he treats you when the honeymoon energy of early relationship begins to settle. Because one of the most important tests available in the early season of any relationship is what happens to his behavior toward you when the effort required to sustain initial impression begins to feel less necessary. The early season of any romantic connection naturally produces elevated effort. He is more attentive than he will necessarily be later, more thoughtful, more deliberately considerate, more careful about how he presents himself. This is normal and not itself a sign of deception. It is simply the natural behavior of a person who is motivated by the desire to be chosen. The question is, what happens when the likelihood of being chosen has increased to a point where the sustained effort of impression feels less urgent? Does his attentiveness settle into a comfortable, ordinary but genuine consideration? Or does it begin to fade toward a baseline that is markedly lower than the peak he maintained while actively pursuing you? Does the thoughtfulness that characterized the pursuit season become incorporated into his natural way of relating to you? Or does it reveal itself as having been strategic, a tool deployed to accomplish an objective, now set aside, now that the objective has been achieved? This is one of the reasons wise women do not accelerate the process of relationship establishment too quickly. Giving a man what he wants before you have observed what his behavior becomes. After the early season of effort passes, whether he maintains pursuit or begins to coast on what has already been secured, is giving away the primary leverage you have for learning who he actually is in ordinary, unimpressive daily life. What is easily given is rarely deeply valued. And the early season of a relationship is one of the places where that principle has its most significant long-term implications. Proverbs 31:10 asks, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. Price implies that something of genuine value requires genuine effort for its acquisition, and that the effort invested in its acquisition shapes how the one who acquires it understands its worth. A man who receives you without effort has not yet learned, through the experience of the pursuit itself, what you are worth. And a man who does not know what you are worth from the experience of the pursuit will be insufficiently equipped to honor that worth in the daily reality of a sustained relationship. I also want to address something that the 10 points above do not explicitly name, but that underlies every one of them, which is the question of emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is not the same as age. A man can be 40 years old and carry the emotional architecture of an 18-year-old in the specific areas where the necessary growth was never done. And a man who is emotionally immature, regardless of his professional success, his spiritual vocabulary, his physical attractiveness, or his surface level charm, will produce particular and predictable kinds of harm in an intimate relationship that are avoidable if you know what to look for early. An emotionally immature man cannot tolerate being uncomfortable. He will avoid difficult conversations indefinitely, not because he does not care about the relationship, but because the discomfort of the conversation itself is something he has not yet developed the internal resources to manage. He will delay, deflect, minimize, or change the subject when anything emotionally difficult arises, and the relationship will develop a pattern of important things never fully being addressed, because the work of addressing them is more than he can currently sustain. An emotionally immature man has difficulty regulating his own emotional states. He experiences emotions intensely and often expresses them at the person nearest to him, rather than processing them in a manner that produces useful communication. He may not have developed the vocabulary to describe what he is feeling with enough specificity to make himself genuinely understood. He may express hurt as anger, anxiety as irritability, insecurity as controlling behavior, without ever fully making the connection between what he is feeling inside and how it is manifesting in his treatment of you. An emotionally immature man struggles with genuine empathy, not because he is callous, but because empathy requires the ability to hold another person's inner experience as real and important, even when it conflicts with or is simply different from your own. A person who has not yet done the work of developing their own emotional awareness struggles to extend that awareness outward to another person's experience, because you cannot consistently offer what you have not yet cultivated within yourself. James 1:19 captures what emotional maturity looks like in relational practice. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. These three qualities, so simple in description and so demanding in practice, are the behavioral expression of emotional maturity in relationship. A man who is swift to hear genuinely listens when you speak without formulating his response before you are finished. A man who is slow to speak holds his words until they have been shaped by understanding, rather than releasing them in the raw, unprocessed form of his immediate reaction. A man who is slow to wrath does not weaponize anger as the default response to discomfort, disappointment, or challenge. These qualities can be observed early, not in extraordinary moments designed to test him, but in the ordinary daily interactions of a developing relationship. How does he listen when you share something that matters to you? Is he present, genuinely present, or is he performing attention while actually waiting for his turn to speak? How does he respond to small disagreements? Does he escalate or does he engage? How does he handle the moments when you are distressed about something that has nothing to do with him? Can he sit with your emotion without immediately trying to fix it, escape it, or make it about himself? Finally, I want to speak to the woman who is reading this and thinking about a specific man, measuring him against these 10 points and finding that several of them produce genuine uncertainty. I want to speak to the discomfort of that uncertainty, because uncertainty in this specific context is not a problem to be resolved quickly. It is information to be honored. The pressure to resolve relational uncertainty quickly is one of the most reliable producers of poor decisions in the area of relationships. It comes from multiple sources. It comes from the internal pressure of attachment that has already begun forming, making the idea of releasing the connection feel more costly than it would if engaged earlier. It comes from the external pressure of a culture, and sometimes a church culture, that treats an unpartnered woman as someone with a problem to be solved rather than a person in a season of discernment. It comes from the subtle but persistent pressure of biological awareness, the knowledge that time is not unlimited, producing an urgency that sometimes overrides wisdom. But the cost of resolving uncertainty prematurely, of choosing to call a man suitable before enough time and enough honest observation have produced a reliable verdict, is paid across years of subsequent experience in a relationship that the rush early assessment was not sufficient to evaluate accurately. The woman who endures 10 years of difficulty in a relationship she entered without adequate information is paying the price of the uncertainty she resolved too quickly. And that price is paid not just in time, but in the quieter, more personal currencies of confidence, joy, calling, and peace. Ecclesiastes 7:8 says, better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. And the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. The patient in spirit, the one who can hold the discomfort of uncertainty without rushing to resolve it by any means available. The one who can endure the social awkwardness of an unresolved season, because she understands that the season of discernment is not the problem, it is the protection. It is the very process by which the information needed to make a wise decision becomes available. Rushing it does not skip the problem. It simply delays the discovery of what the problem was until you are much more deeply invested in a situation that you could have assessed far more easily and far less expensively in the season when it was still appropriate to do so. You have permission to take your time. You have permission to observe carefully. You have permission to ask the questions that matter without apology. You have permission to let what you observe inform your decisions, even when what you observe is disappointing. You have permission to remain in the season of discernment until the discernment is genuinely complete, rather than rushing to a conclusion, because the discomfort of uncertainty has become harder to hold than the risk of a premature decision. And you have more than permission. You have wisdom inviting you toward exactly this kind of patient, honest, unhurried, God-anchored evaluation. Because the man who is genuinely right for your life will not be disadvantaged by your careful observation. He will confirm himself through it. The man who is genuinely right will welcome your questions, will behave consistently across context and time, will demonstrate the character I have described in the ordinary daily moments as much as in the elevated ones, will grow more certain and more clearly himself the longer you observe him, rather than more mysterious and more concerning. That consistency, that confirmation, that growing clarity is what you are waiting for. Not the electricity of early attraction, not the comfort of familiarity, not the relief of ending the season of singleness, but the specific, scripture-grounded, peace-confirmed, wisdom-verified knowledge that the person in front of you is who he presents himself to be, and that who he presents himself to be is the person your calling, your children, and your covenant deserve. Do not date him until you know that. And trust that the God who withholds no good thing from those who walk uprightly, as Psalm 84:11 declares, is not withholding what you need. He is preparing you to receive it with the eyes to see it clearly, the wisdom to choose it rightly, and the wholeness to steward it well.